The Earth is 71% water, meaning there is far more water than there is land to stand upon. And we don't need to venture very far from the shoreline before our toes can't touch, before we're floating, anchorless.
My family and I recently took a trip to Hawaii, and as we walked into the condo that would be our house for the next week and a half, I was instantly drawn to the back sliding glass door. I walked through it onto a balcony that sat 40 feet above the water. I stood there as I watched the tide roll in and the beach disappear bit by bit as the waves crashed onto the rocks below. On the third night, my family and I were sitting out on the balcony, but off into the distance, I saw someone. I walked to the edge of the balcony, I looked over, and I saw this woman bobbing up and down, up and down.
Drowning doesn't look anything like it does in the movies. First comes the realization, I am drowning. The body goes into autopilot. Scientists call it the instinctive drowning response. And as you fight to keep your mouth above the waterline, that precious moment is dedicated only to gasping for the next breath.
There had to have been 24 plus people staring at the same thing I was looking at. But no one was moving. All of us realized that something wasn't right, even though we weren't for sure what we were looking at. But I knew that if we waited too long, it would be too late. So I started running.
When you realize you're drowning, it's like trying to climb a wall, but you can't get a grip. Everything's slipping between your fingers. You can usually only struggle in this way for less than a minute before you'll slip under the surface for good. You'll begin losing consciousness, and with that, you may experience a brief moment of tranquility before.
Fully clothed, I jumped into the water, and I began to swim out to this woman. I grabbed her, kind of put her on my back, and began to swim into the shore. I'm almost screaming at her, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" She gently just nods her head. And then I looked up to the cliff, and I saw all of those people, and they hadn't even moved.
Most of the time, drowning looks unremarkable. People have been known to watch it happen and not realize what they're seeing. It can all look normal.
In that, the narrator referenced something called instinctive drowning response. I'm going to read you more about that. It says, while distress and panic may sometimes take place beforehand, drowning itself is deceptively quick and often silent. A person at or close to the point of drowning is unable to keep their mouth above water long enough to breathe properly and is unable to shout. Lacking air, their body cannot perform the voluntary efforts involved in waving or seeking attention. Involuntary actions operated by the autonomic nervous system involve lateral flapping and paddling with the arms that press down into the water in an effort to raise the mouth long enough to breathe, and tilting the head back. As an instinctive reaction, this is not consciously mediated nor under conscious control. The lack of leg movement, upright position, inability to talk or keep the mouth consistently above water, and upon attempting to reach the victim, the absence of expected rescue-directed actions are evidenced by this condition. The instinct takes place for typically no longer than the final 20 to 60 seconds during drowning and before sinking underwater. And then it said this, to an untrained observer, it may not be obvious that a drowning person is in distress. They may appear to be swimming safely while within 20 to 60 seconds of sinking under the surface. This past week, I actually heard that message. I listened to many churches in different podcasts as I'm exercising and running in the morning, and I listened to that sermon, and initially I listened to the audio, and then I got the video, and I watched it, and one of the things I was shocked by was what it said, that there was a lack of response from the people as they were looking out, seeing a person drowning. And for me, initially I was kind of annoyed by that. I thought, man, why won't people respond? I mean, that's a teaching pastor for Willow Creek that was just talking there. And he said that there were at least 24, if not more, 20, 30 people that were watching and they weren't responding. I was kind of annoyed by that. But then as I listened to the video again and as I studied what I just read to you, I realized it wasn't a lack of caring on their part. It was a lack of awareness of what was going on. And then I just started to think about that, and I thought, how shocking is it that you could watch someone in total distress, someone in absolute panic, someone within 1 minute of dying? How could you look at them and not realize what is going on? I mean, just the thought of that a person could be in such distress and freaking out and losing hope while people are watching and have no idea what's going on. I mean, I realize what is said, and I realize that that's a reality, but I just thought, how sad is that? I mean, how shocking is that? Anyone else find that shocking that you could be looking at a person in absolute panic and not have any idea what's going on? But then as I thought about it all week, for some reason, I don't know why this is, I think sometimes God just does that to get my attention. I just could not stop thinking about this video. I could not stop thinking about it. And what's ironic is that is the most amazing intro to a sermon. I didn't even listen to the sermon, so I have no idea what the sermon's about. But I just listened to that first part, and I just kept thinking about it, and I listened to it multiple times, and I had some friends over this week, and I said, you got to watch this video, and I showed it to them. Like, what a horrible party starter, right? Like, here, watch this sad video. Okay, all right, let's eat hot dogs, and some of you said, oh, okay, so. But anyway, as I was thinking about it, I thought, you know what, though? I think what's just as shocking or just as sad is that there are many of people around us that are sinking in life, that are in distress of life, losing hope. There are many of you that are here today, right now, that are losing hope, that have lost hope, that are sinking in life, and you're struggling, and you're desiring to find rescue. You're desiring to find hope, and it's possible that right now in your condition you feel exactly like a person that's just trying to keep their head above water. You're just trying to gasp for air. You're trying to grasp for something solid in your life, and you've been unable to do that. Maybe it's a relationship you're in. You just sense that relationship is going toward destruction, and it scares you. And so you have a panic in that. Maybe it's a friendship. Maybe it's a dating relationship. Maybe it's a marriage. Or maybe in your life it's your finances, and they're just sinking, and it's getting out of control. And you know it. You can feel it, and you just want to get your head above water. Maybe it's your health. Maybe you've received a negative health report, and it just has the potential to overwhelm you in your life. Maybe it's an addiction, something that you've tried to conquer in your life, but you can't. Something that just keeps pulling you down, pulling you down, pulling you down. Maybe it's depression. I know depression has a way of distorting the reality of your life, and maybe depression has a grip on you. It's hurting you. Maybe it's some type of abuse that's in your life. Maybe you're in a relationship where someone is physically abusing you, emotionally abusing you, maybe sexually abusing you. And you just have no idea how to get out of this, and it's destroying your life. Maybe it's grief. It's some loss that you have, loss of a person, loss of something that was valuable to you, and as you think about it over and over, it just has the potential to overwhelm you. Well, here's what I want to do today is I want to offer you a life buoy. And I'm not the life buoy, obviously. I want to offer you Jesus. I want to offer you some hope, because what we're going to look at today in our series in Luke, as we go through, we're going to look at a story of a person who was in total despair that found hope, a person that was on the path to death that found life, a person that was in absolute rejection by the culture that they lived in who found acceptance, and all of it was possible because of Jesus. And so today's service is going to look different. I'm going to preach briefly, and I'm glad no one cheered when I said that, but I'm going to preach briefly, but we're going to have an extended time at the end for response. And when you came in, hopefully you received a piece of white paper. If not, in front of you, there's pieces of paper in the seat backs in front of you. You can just use one of those. And what we're going to do at the end is we're going to allow you to just write down. If you want, you can put your name on it. If you want to keep it anonymous, keep it anonymous. You can put your name and then your prayer request. And at the end, we're going to invite you to come up and submit, and just drop them in the boxes that are here in the front. And we're going to have you stay up here in the front, and we're just going to pray for you. Because I know there are a lot of you that this message is going to connect to you. There's a lot of you that need to discover hope. And so if you would you turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 5. I'll prep you in advance. This isn't a sermon that is going to need to take notes on. You're always welcome to. We're going to look at 2 verses today. Just simply 2 verses. And I really want you to receive this message. I want you to hear it and take it in. So however you need to do that. In verse 12, we're going to read the first half of verse 12. So Luke chapter 5, verse 12. While Jesus was in one of the cities, there came a man full of leprosy. Let's stop there. See, leprosy is not something that's very prevalent in the American culture. Right now, there are about 6,500 known cases in the United States in comparison to 2 million worldwide. It used to be way more prevalent than that, but we have medicines that can actually cure that disease. So there's only a very small percentage in the United States of leprosy. But what leprosy is, it's a bacteria that attacks the nervous system. And so when a person gets leprosy, it starts to break down their bodies. It even starts to impact their skin. Many times people that have that for prolonged times will start to lose their eyesight, will start to break their body down. But one of the most destructive parts of leprosy is actually, as it destroys your nervous system, you can no longer have the sensation of being able to feel things. And so most of the destruction of leprosy takes place because of injury. So people can touch something that is flaming hot and not realize it, and as a result, destroy their fingers, destroy their feet, even destroy other parts of their body. But in the times of the Bible, when this took place, leprosy was considered to be highly contagious, even though it really wasn't. It is contagious, but not highly contagious. Here, I'll just give a random fact. The only known way we know right now in the States to catch leprosy is by coming in contact with an armadillo. Random fact for the day, okay? Share that at your next dinner meeting, okay? You guys know that armadillos have leprosy? Okay, but bacteria, so it was caused by bacteria, and so when someone had leprosy, there was no known cure in that culture. So with the idea that no known cure, the destructive element of it, where it became physically aware when you saw a person that had leprosy, and then also the thought that it was highly contagious, caused the cultures to absolutely reject them, and anyone with leprosy would have to leave and separate from the healthy culture and many times go to leper colonies. And unfortunately, this is still the case in some countries. Some countries still have leper colonies. Some countries still have hospitals just for people with leprosy, even though now we can heal that disease. And so this individual that comes to Jesus, I want you to think about his mindset for a second. I'm not even taking too many liberties with this. I mean, it doesn't actually say this, but we can put ourselves into his shoes. Here's a man that it says is full of leprosy, which means he's had that disease for a long time, because it takes a while for it to actually take over a body. So this person is full of leprosy. He's had it for years. So here's the reality of his life. He has a condition that has caused him to be secluded from culture, to be rejected and isolated from culture. He's sick, knowing that it's going to progress in a very painful and destructive way in his body, where he's going to become disfigured. And he also knows eventually it's going to lead to his death. And so he knows this is his reality. He's sick. He's going to die painfully, rejected, and alone. This is his reality. And the way I thought about my mind is I thought, what was in this guy's mind one day before he heard about Jesus? One day before he heard that there might possibly be some hope for his future. Well, my guess is this man had total despair, as he just knew that he was sick and that he was dying. But then he hears about Jesus. He hears about some hope. He hears about a possibility that something can change in his life. But for this man, the problem was for him was that the solution to his problem was almost unattainable because of his problem. You see, he was isolated. He wasn't allowed to come into contact with people who were healthy. When people with leprosy would come into any type of community, they would have to announce their presence to allow people to scatter. And obviously people were afraid because of ignorance and because of the reality of the disease. People would run away, and so they would come in as a group and they would announce leprosy or lepers, and they would come in. In some cultures nowadays, they would have to ring bells and alert people they were coming as if they were like cattle or something. Very, very sad to think about. And so this guy knew, well, if Jesus is the one that can change me, but in the same time he's thinking, but Jesus is healthy, Jesus is whole. The only way for me to get to Jesus is I have to break these rules. I have to go against what culture is telling me and come into proximity of Jesus so I can just call out to him and maybe he will heal me. And that's often the way it is for us at times, is that the problems of our lives somehow teach us or communicate to us that we have to take it on alone, that we can't reach out for help from others and we can't even reach out for Jesus. If your problem and what's causing you despair in your life is a sin-related problem especially, we just feel like we can't reach out to Jesus. I have to become cleaner before I reach out to him. And then we have situations in our life, and I keep using the term situation because I don't know that any of us, well, let me say this, I want to clarify. I think there are some of us that are probably in total despair in our lives. But the average person, it's not so much that their entire life has despair as much as there's a situation in their life where there's despair. Where there's something in your life that you just feel like, I have no hope in this one area. I might still have optimism for the future, but when I look at this one situation, I just don't feel like there is hope. And as we go through that in our lives, there are times we start to hear a voice, whether it's someone else saying it to us or it's just our own minds thinking. We start to hear a voice that says, it's not going to change. Nothing's going to change. How many of you have ever heard that voice? It's not going to change. It just is what it is. It's not going to change. That's just the reality of my life. Or worse yet, If you ever had this spoken over you, just the sting of this phrase where someone says, you're not going to change. That's who you are. You're not going to change. You've always been that way. You've been that way for 5 years. You've been that way for 10 years. You've been that way for your whole life. You're not going to change. And as we start to think about those statements and we start to hear that over and over in our heads, it has a way of removing all hope from us. And it destroys our optimism. It destroys the way we think about the future. And I want to ask you, as you hear those voices and you have that despair in your life, how do you respond to that? I'm just going to give a list of things I thought about that I've already shared a little bit, but I want to go a little bit more in depth. Things that I think can cause despair in our lives. I think one is relationships. There are times that you start to sense a friendship going toward a destructive path. As you start to sense the deterioration of a friendship, and many times that this might be what's going on in your life, you think, I don't want that friendship to end. Or maybe it already has ended. Maybe it's something they did, or even I think sometimes what's worse is something that we did, something we do that causes us to have all that remorse and all that regret. And you see this friendship going in a direction, you just think, okay, I don't see that ever being reconciled. I don't see that ever being fixed. And maybe it's a relationship with a friend, or maybe it's a relationship with a brother or a sister. Maybe it's a relationship with a parent or with a child. Maybe it's a relationship with a coworker. Maybe it's with a boss. And you just feel like there's just no way this is going to change. Maybe it's a relationship with a marriage. Your marriage is struggling. And here's what I know. It's difficult at times to think that there's going to be reconciliation in a marriage, but most of the people I know don't just want reconciliation. They want to be happy. And so the idea and the ideals of happiness seem so far, because you think, I'm not even sure we can even reconcile, let alone be happy. And so we start to embrace this lie in our minds over and over. It's not going to change. You're not going to change. Or maybe the despair in your life is something in your character. Something in your character where you just think, I want to change, I desire to change, but I don't. I've had conversations with people that struggle with lying. And they've even told me, they say, I lie about the stupidest things. The most simple things. And people ask me questions, and I exaggerate. People ask me, I start to tell a story, and all of a sudden I realize the story I'm telling is not even true. And I have no reason to do it. I'm not in trouble, but I just keep lying, and I don't want to do that. And there's that part of me that I think, I'm never going to change. Or maybe you think, I just wish I had a better work ethic. I wish I was more patient. I wish I was more disciplined in my life. And you look at your character and you think, there's no way I'm going to change. I'm this age already, and I've tried for this many years, and I'm not going to change. Maybe it's your finances. I know when you get into that season where more money is going out than's coming in, it can really overwhelm you quickly. And you might be looking at your finances right now going, I don't know how this works out. All I know is that the numbers don't add up. And I know that every month I still have my mortgage payment, and every month I still have my car payment, and every month I still have my electric bill. And you're looking at your situation, and you think, I don't know how this is going to change. I've made a lot of decisions that have put me in a difficult situation. And so you start to feel despair of that. Maybe it's your health. Maybe you've received a negative health report, and you just don't know how to respond. And as a pastor, I've been in that. I've sat in the rooms with people and talked to people as they've told me the devastating news that they got a cancer report. They got the report about a disease that they know is going to be destructive in their lives. And they've said, I don't know where to go from here. I don't know how to process that. Or maybe your health problem is that you've wanted to get in shape. You're out of shape and you're not eating healthy and you desire to be that way. You know you're on a path that if you continue on this path, you're going to die early. And so you want to get in shape, but you keep finding yourself eating the wrong foods. And you keep setting as a standard, in the morning I'm going to get up and work out, but when your alarm goes off, you just hit snooze. And hit snooze, and then hit snooze, and then hit snooze, and then hit snooze, right? We've all been there. But maybe that's the part where you're starting to lose hope. Or maybe it's addiction. Maybe in your life that you're addicted to something. Maybe it's something like shopping, where you know you don't have the finances to support it, but you just get that momentary buzz, that high, when you buy something new. And so you keep buying stuff, and it keeps destroying yourself, and it keeps destroying your family. Maybe the addiction is drugs or alcohol, that you need that high to escape the problems of life. And I know there's very much a physical addiction to it, but there's also an emotional and mental addiction to that. Maybe the addiction is smoking. Maybe the addiction is pornography, where you don't want to continue to look at pornography. And though you experience excitement in the process, right after it, in all forms of addiction, right after you use, you immediately feel the regret. You feel the shame and the frustration. Maybe the despair in your life is depression. As depression starts to distort your reality. And I've had bouts of depression in my life. I'm thankful that it's not extreme, but I've had bouts of depression in my life. times where my reality has been distorted, and though life can be going well, you look at your situation and you just think, I don't know that I have hope. And you start to feel depression, and you start to feel discouraged, and you start to lose optimism. Maybe it's some type of abuse in your life. Someone's abusing you, and for some reason that person has a hold on you. Maybe it's their financial support of your life. Maybe it's just because you don't see any other options of how you get out of it, and so you're in a relationship where someone's physically abusing you, mentally abusing you, emotionally abusing you, maybe even sexually abusing you, and you have no idea how to get out of it, and so you feel despair about that. Maybe it's grief. Maybe you've lost that loved one. And I know I've had very close friends that have lost loved ones, lost family, brothers, sisters, and children, and parents, and there's just some grief you just never get over. And so you have that as a reality of your life. Every morning when you wake up, you think about it. Throughout the day, you're reminded of it. You go to sleep with that on your mind. Or maybe it's just simply your relationship with Jesus, that you wish you were better at serving Jesus. You know the importance of reading the Bible. You know the importance of prayer. You know the importance of worship. And you keep setting that as a goal, but as you keep reaching out for it, you keep failing to attain it. And so you start to feel hopeless about that. I'm never going to change. It's never going to change. Well, that type of despair that embraces our life or grips our life, this man with leprosy had the same thing. But he reached a breaking point. He decided he was going to try one last thing. He was going to, no matter what anyone else said, he was going to try something different, because here's what he realized. He had no other option. So going back to verse 12, he said this. While he was in one of the cities talking about Jesus, there came a man full of leprosy. And when he saw Jesus, he fell on his face and begged him, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. I know this man's heart, because I've prayed that simple prayer so many times in my life. Lord, if you will, you can change my life. Lord, if you will, you can change the reality of my dysfunction. I'll tell you, as a pastor, I still pray that often. I still struggle with so many insecurities. I still struggle with problems in my life and behaviors I can't overcome. And there are times I just cry out to God, Lord, if you will, I know you can change my situation. And this man busted through the crowds, busted through what culture told him, and he runs to the feet of Jesus, and he falls at his feet, and he says, Jesus, you can change my life. And here's what I want to say to all of us. We have to get to a point where we allow desperation to lead us to Jesus. We have to get to a point where we realize there is no other options. There is no other hope. Now, if you apply that logic to any other relationship, it breaks down. I mean, can you imagine if you're talking to your boyfriend or girlfriend or even your spouse, if you were to say to them, well, couldn't find anyone better, so I chose you. Have you ever seen that on a Hallmark card? I mean, happy Valentine's Day. Couldn't find anyone better. All right? Obviously, it breaks down there. But when we go to Jesus and we say, Jesus, I looked, I searched, and I looked around, and here's what I realized. I couldn't find anyone better than you, because there is no one better than you. Jesus is okay with that. It reminds me of the story in John chapter 6 where he's talking to his apostles, and he's preaching this very difficult message. And it's one that caused people to leave him. And groups of people, disciples, get up and they start to leave Jesus, and they quit following him. And he looks at his 12, and he says, are you two going to leave me? And Peter says, Lord, where else am I going to go? You have the words of life. And I love the desperation even in Peter's response. Lord, I have no other option. Though I have no idea what you're talking about right now, I don't understand the sermon you just said, and it's causing others to leave. Here's what I know. I don't have any other options. I only have you. And for us in our lives, we have to get to a point where we allow the desperation of our lives to push us toward Jesus, where we realize we can't do it on our own, and culture's not going to save us, and the government's not going to save us, and our family's not going to save us. It is only Jesus who can change our situation. And the reason we can do that with confidence is this is the heart of Jesus. That he says to us, come to me if you're broken. Come to me if you're struggling. Come to me if you've lost hope. Here's some passages. Philippians 4, verse 4 and following says, he says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. So he's telling people to be happy, but he's about to give them some context, even in your problems. He says, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything. He says, guys, you don't need to worry. You don't need to be stressed. And here's the reason why. He says, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Here's the reason why you can have peace. He says, because I want you to submit it to me. I want you to bring your dysfunction to me. I want you to bring your despair to me. I want you to surrender to me. And then he gives this promise. He says, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts in your minds in Christ Jesus. Here's the promise of Jesus. I will give you a peace that doesn't make sense. I will give you hope when you shouldn't have hope. I will change your mind and I will change your heart. And I love how it says in 1 Peter. In 1 Peter it says that we can cast our cares upon God knowing this truth, that he cares about us. Now I want you to think about, you probably heard that passage many, many times in your life, but think about what's being said. The Almighty Creator God says to us, the reason I want you to bring your dysfunction to me is because I care about you. Because I want to fix your situation. I want to help you in your despair. I care about this in your lives. The problem is when we feel unclean, we feel compelled to stay away. But just the opposite is true. The only way we can be made clean is to come near to Jesus. And this man with leprosy realized that. He reached a point where he just said, there's no other option. I don't have any other option. If I stay where I'm currently, if I keep doing the same things I'm doing right now, it ends in death and rejection. So the only option I have is to cry out to Jesus. But this is the heart of Jesus. He says, come. Come to me. When you don't feel hope, come to me. When you don't feel like you have optimism, come to me. And keep coming because I care about you. And then Jesus responds in verse 13. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him. And I love this response. See, Jesus heals him, but he does something deeper than even sometimes we realize. See, Jesus, he healed him, but he could have done it from afar. Jesus could have just said the words, but instead he does something for this man that no one has probably done for years in his life. And this sounds subtle, but I want you to realize why Jesus did this. Instead of just speaking the words which he could have and healing this man with leprosy in front of him, the man who's at his feet begging him to change his life, Jesus did something radical. Jesus reached down and he touched him. No one that was healthy had probably touched this man in years. The physical touch of Jesus. And he reaches down and he touches the man in his contagious being. He touches him in his filth and his dirtiness. He touches him and says, I will touch you. And I will heal you. And immediately all the disease left this man. But why was Jesus so confident to touch this man? Why? Because Jesus knew he was going to heal him. See, what Jesus was doing in this moment was two types of healing. He was meeting a physical need, but he was meeting also an emotional need in this man. Because Jesus realized a lot of our situations, it's sometimes physical, but sometimes emotional. And in this moment, he touched him, and he was saying to this guy two things. The reason I'm not afraid to touch you is because I know I can heal you. And another reason I'm not afraid to touch you is because I love you. And this is the power that we have to understand. The reason God is not afraid of any of our problems or any of our dysfunction is he knows these two truths. He can fix our situation. He can heal our disease. He can restore our relationships. He can change all the devastation of our lives. He can bring that to restoration. He has the power to do it. But then on the second level, he says, and also I want you to know it's because I love you. This is the reason I came, was not to condemn you, not to reject you. I came for this purpose and this purpose alone. I came so that you can have hope, that you can have restoration in your life. And so Jesus reaches out and touches this man. And I want you to think back. And I'm going to read a list. I'm going to go through it quickly, but I want you just to think from all that you know about God, all you know in the scriptures, this has always been the nature of God, to find us in our brokenness and to use us. God used broken people, people who didn't seem qualified, people who messed up. He used them over and over. Let me read this list to you. I want you to think about Adam and Eve. The moment they rebel against God, they rebel against God. They sin against God. They disobey God. And immediately they feel shame because of their sin. What does God do? He clothes them. Have you ever thought about how loving that moment was? That all of a sudden, because of their disobedience, they feel naked and shame. And God says, let me cover that for you. And he makes them clothes. And then immediately God speaks to them a plan of restoration. So in the moment of their sin, God launches a plan of restoration for their lives. Let me just go through this list. There was Abraham. And Abraham was too old to have children. He was 75 years old. But God calls him to be the father of the nation. And he wouldn't even actually realize this promise until he was 100 years old. And so him and his wife, childless. And we know that Abraham at times struggled with courage, struggled and even lied about his wife. Then there's Isaac, who was a daydreamer. And there was Isaac also, who lied about his wife, not a man of incredible courage. Then there was Jacob. Jacob was a liar and a manipulator, and God used him. Leah was ugly by the standard of her culture. Joseph was abused and rejected by his brothers. Moses had a stuttering problem and was a murderer. Gideon was afraid. Gideon's response to God when he came to him And God called Gideon. Gideon's response is, God, you have the wrong person. I mean, can you just hear the insecurity in his voice where he says, God, there's no hope with me if you're going to use me. He says, because of all the clans, my clan is the weakest. Of my tribe, my family is the weakest in that. And he says, and I'm the weakest in my family. So he says to God, God, I'm a nobody. There's no hope if you use me. And God used him to find incredible victory for the nation of Israel. Samson was a womanizer and a fool. Rahab was a prostitute. Jeremiah and Timothy were considered too young to be used by God. David was an adulterer and a murderer. Elijah was depressed and even suicidal. Jonah ran away from God. Naomi was a widow. Zechariah and Elizabeth were barren. Mary was a poor peasant girl. Peter denied Christ over and over. The disciples fell asleep while Jesus asked them to pray. Martha worried about everything. The Samaritan woman at the well had been married 5 times and was currently living with the guy when Jesus called her. Zacchaeus was short and a tax collector. Levi was a tax collector where he was called. Jesus came into contact with a woman caught in adultery, and he showed her love and mercy. Jesus came into contact with a woman who had an issue of blood, so she would have been rejected by culture. And when she touched him, he was not put off by it, but instead healed her too. When Jesus called Paul, he was a murderer. When Jesus did a miracle in Lazarus' life, Lazarus was dead. Talking about no hope there. But I think the best example and the reason we can have confidence to go before God is what we know about Jesus. It says in Philippians that Jesus was fully God, that all things that were created through him. He was absolutely perfectly equal with God, fully God. But it said he surrendered that for one purpose, to come and take on the form of his creation, humanity, for this purpose, so that he could give us hope again, that he could restore our lives. I'll say it, this is the simplest way I can put it. The reason we can have hope is this is the only reason Jesus came. If we don't run to Jesus in our despair, there's no reason for Jesus to come. And so what he's calling us to do today is to come to him. If we're broken, if we're weary, if we've lost hope, to come to him and allow him to change that. And he might do a miracle in our situation. He does it every single day, all day long. Or he might change our heart. But either way, God is going to do something miraculous in our lives. And the fear that many people have is they have to be clean enough or good enough to come to Jesus. The problem is there's no way to become clean apart from Jesus. There's no way to get hope apart from him. There's no way to change apart from Jesus. There's no way to be set free. And so here's the good news of this. We don't have to speak poetically to get God to respond. This man with leprosy came and said, Lord, if you are willing. And I hope that's our heart today. Lord, if you are willing. If you are willing, you can change my situation. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to invite all of you to take those pieces of paper out. If you have a situation, it might not be your entire life full of despair, but you might have one. And I want to give you a couple of examples so you understand my mind. I am incredibly optimistic about the future. I'm excited about the future. But I have a couple areas in my life where I've lost hope. I have loved ones that I can't imagine ever getting saved. I have loved ones that I pray for often, but I've had conversations with them, and their response is, I'm not going to turn to Jesus. I know all the information. I'm not going to turn to Jesus. And I look at them and I think, there's no hope. They're never going to change. There are relationships in my life that I can feel right now that are starting to feel like they're deteriorating. And it makes me nervous and it makes me sad. And there's parts of me that says, I don't know if there's any hope there. And so these are the things I'm taking to God and saying, God, I've lost hope in these areas. Will you help me? Lord, if you are willing, will you change this? So what I'm going to encourage you to do over the next 5 minutes is just to spend some time writing those out. Again, you can write your name or not write your name. You can leave them anonymous. But in a moment, after 5 minutes, I'm going to invite you to come up if you have those, and you can drop them in any one of these boxes. There's 3 up here. Drop it in there. It will be kept anonymous with just our staff and our pastor so we can pray over you. You can drop it up and then just stay up here. And then we're going to surround you, lay hands on you, and we're going to pray for all these situations, believing that the same way that Jesus reached out and touched the man with leprosy and healed him, that he's going to do the same thing in our lives and in our hearts and in our minds. So right now, take some time and fill these sheets out.